Now let's take a look at 2b. So I guess that, I'm assuming you guys are okay with the one that worked out, right? It's the one on the right-hand side. They call it like pencil problems. Like you have to, try on your own. So I'll say that what if the equation is like sine of theta is -1? Would you guys be able to figure out what theta is in a general way? Because it's not going to be only one angle, right? It will be infinite many. So how would you find out the angle theta? And you realize that's not in the chart, right? That's when the unit circle comes in. But can you guys confirm first, is sine theta the horizontal or the vertical coordinate of a point on unit circle? It will be vertical, right? So now, where do you think that point has to be so that the vertical coordinate has to be -1? It has to be over here, right? And this is the only point where the vertical coordinate has to be -1. And the angle will be 270, right? Are you guys okay with radians at this point? How about we try radians, right? So it'd be 3 pi over 2, right? But how do I make it like infinite many? Yes. But this time I'm going to add n times 2 pi since I'm dealing with the radians, right? But it's ugly to put n times 2 pi. So people decided to do 2n pi. It's the same, right? So, I mean, it's multiplication, right? There's no reason why, but it's just maybe most people believe that that's prettier than, Well, you know what? We wish that we get to decide the rule, right? It's not us, right? Anyway, now can you guys remind me what n stands for? Integer, so it'll be 0, right? Plus or minus 1, plus or minus 2, ... right? So let me box this. So you know that this is actually what your thinking process is. That doesn't solve the actual equation, right? But what it does is, now you realize, oh, it's not just theta inside the sine function. It's actually 2 theta over 3, right? So it is this guy. When you take it inside the sine function, it returns -1. But I know that this guy has to be 3 pi over 2 plus that many possibilities. So is it okay if I just put 2 theta over 3 equals 3 pi over 2 plus 2n pi? I know that's confusing because the theta here is not the same as the theta over there. You guys notice the difference? This is the tool, right? It's like a general model. So whatever that's inside the sine by itself, it has to work out as 3 pi over 2 plus 2n pi if you want a -1. But now it's not just theta by itself. It's with that 2 divided by 3, right? This whole thing has to work out just like the theta here, right? Which is 3 pi over 2 plus 2n pi, right? But now if you're okay with that equation, ask yourself, what are you solving for from that equation? You don't want 2 theta over 3, right? You want theta by itself, right? How'd you get it from that equation I just wrote? Okay, so multiply by 3 across the board, right? I'll write it down. So it'll be 2 theta equals, unfortunately, you get some kind of ugly numbers, right? 9 pi over 2 plus 2 times 3, so it'll be 6 pi, right? 6 10 pi Divide out the 2, yes. Right, so 9 pi over 4 plus 3 pi, right? So are we good? Okay. And the n is does the same thing, right? 0 plus minus 1 plus minus 2. Okay, so now remind yourself that they have a restricted domain for theta. It has to be between 0 and 2 pi, right? Since theta has to be greater than 0, less than 2 pi, right? So now let's just fix the n to get as many values of theta that fits into the range, right? Let me try n equal to 0, right? Would that work? Theta is 9 pi over 4 plus 0, right? It will be still 9 pi over 4, right? Does that fit into the range? Is 9 pi over 4 less than or greater than 2 pi? Greater than, right? That means that's wrong. Moving on. N equal to 1. Might say, hey, wait a second, 0 doesn't work, right? If you take n to be 1, that's even bigger, right? That's even worse. Forget about n equal to 1. Now, what about n equal to negative 1? All right, let's write it down. Theta is 9 pi over 4 minus 3 pi. Well, unfortunately, 3 pi is actually bigger than 9 pi over 4. That becomes negative. That's still wrong. So now, what do you think? I do know the general solution. But somehow, person asks for something that's just not reasonable, right? So they want the theta to be in that range. And I've been trying very hard, right? I see that n equal to 0 doesn't work. N equal to 1 doesn't work, right? And bigger n, will make it worse. Not to mention that negative n, right? Negative 1, negative 2 is going to be getting worse and worse, right? That means there's no solution to this equation in that restricted domain. But it does have solution in general. And you show me that you know how to get it, right? So now realistically, if it's in a test, you get to this far, you get 4 out of 5, and you have to tell me after some reasoning, or maybe show me something that I can make sure that you do know, how to tell, when there's no solution, or if there is, right? How do you figure it out, right? But again, I'll be reasonable. If you're getting 4 out of 5, and somehow the reason that you get 89, then I'll put that point back in. Because again, for me, it is if you're able to tell the general pattern, right? It's like, if you can derive the formula for yourself, like you can even show me that you can even prove how the Pythagorean theorem works out, right? So I'm not too worried about the right angle tricks for you because, you already know the hard stuff, right? But if you could, get it perfect. But you might not have the time to do it. So I'll say that just be reasonable, right? So if you get to this far, you see that, the time is getting kind of tight in the test, move on. Go to the next problem, make it perfect. You might get 5 out of 5 for the next problem, right? If you have time, come back to it because, it's not worth to, spend 10 minutes on that one single point. Make sense? All right. Now I think someone said 3B, right? I will be sharing with you the notes today. You don't have to email me about that. I'll just post it on D2L. So just take a look, just keep an eye on the announcement. All right, so you don't have to. Go ahead. Now for a question like that, you can imagine that a student put down the general solution and all of a sudden decide there's no solution. The student must know exactly what's going on, right? Because would you, for some reason, you got a beautiful solution now in front of you and you decide not to take it? There must be a good reason for you to do that, right? Because it's kind of risky, right? What if you're wrong? If the student decides to put no solution and have to be right, I'm assuming that the student knows exactly how that works out. And you still get that point. But if you don't tell me anything, you just stopped at this point, there's no way I can assume that you know it, right? Does it make sense? So, and I always like to say that you guys are better off with the free response because there's more freedom for you and for me to figure out the grade, right? But in a fair way. All right. So don't stress out if you don't get things done perfectly. Maybe it haven't worked out the way that I want, right? So you're not penalized for not getting a perfect work. Now 3B. Now I will quickly look into 3B, but only get into a point that you guys are able to solve, referring to how we did with those fundamental equations, right? So you see that on the right-hand side, we have something about cosine x, right? So you're going to have to think, okay, how would I get just the cosine x by itself? So I know how to do that, right, with the unit circle. So you would isolate the cosine x, but you have to do that first by isolating the 4 cosine squared x, right, which is 1. So you divide out the 4. So cosine squared x will be 1/4. To get just the cosine x, you will take the square root, right? And don't forget the plus or minus. Okay. Now, you guys okay algebraically to get all the way here? I know that usually, people need to know when do they have to do that, right? So sometimes they get lost, like, they don't know how to get started. Solving, most of the math problems, is not to mention solving equations, is not about how to solve for every single equation. It's how you can write those equations that you didn't know how to solve into the one that you know how to solve, right? So in this case, you see that it's not in a form that matches one of those that you already know very well how to solve. So you figure out whatever it takes so you can write the equation in such a form. And in this case, you think, what helped us to get to this fundamental form? It's called isolation of the cosine x, right? And later on, you'll probably see the problems that I picked from the question bank, and most likely you're going to have to do factoring, right? So factoring, isolation, those are the general skills you have to do to get yourself those fundamental equations. And you have actually 2 fundamental equations, right? Cosine x equals 1/2, or cosine x equals -1/2. So even if you have a restricted domain, let's see how quick you guys are. How many solutions are you expecting from the first equation when it comes to x2? The easy one will be 60 degree, right? 1/2, right? Cosine is 1/2. The other one is, I'll say, -60 or 300. Again, if you know how the unit circle works out, right? But I'll leave that to you to figure it out. Now, -1/2, as you know, that cosine is the horizontal coordinate, right? Instead of looking at the right half plane of the unit circle, you're looking at the left half plane. Angle is going to be greater, right? It will be probably 120 or 240, right? Something like that, okay? But you should be confident when you get to this far. If you're running, short in time in the test, I suggest you move on, come back to it, because you can't figure it out. You just have to calm down, to think about the unit circle. You need to have the time to draw it, right? To make sure that whatever you do, make it count. Otherwise, you do something random on it, it doesn't really get you the points and even confuse yourself with more, right? Because there will be easy questions. All right. So there will be in total 4 solutions, right? Let me show that you can figure them out. So now, if you guys are okay with me moving on to some questions that I picked. Oh yeah, go ahead. That I picked from the second packet for the test review. I don't know if you realize there are 2 packets, right? And the reason why I didn't emphasize the second packet is just, to me, it's not that realistic. Think about this, I have already students, and I never had students, missing the first set of homework, right? And I even remember back in, college algebra, students having a hard time to get the homework done. But I have a couple of students have to come and make up a second test. And I have students, missing classes due to multiple J8 events and stuff. But I know how hard it is to get the homework done, even though I decided not to change the due date. I could have, but I, feel like that's unfair for those students who actually get the homework done on time, right? I know that, if you're onto that many things, you know that you still have to prioritize stuff the way to make it work, right? And that's why, I use the first packet, which only has 30 questions to have you guys to work on as a quiz, right? So most people are fine with most of the problems. Well, I'll get to some of the tricky ones tomorrow. The second packet is only useful if you're looking at those questions about solving equations. And therefore, I picked those equation solving problems from the second test review packet to only go over the strategy and also some test taking skills with you. Since I'm getting recorded, I suggest that you watch the recording. You don't have to work out, those problems, but you need to understand why am I, doing the kind of reasoning, right? Or how I can figure out the answers in a more reliable way, or at least that know what to do to get started for equations that you don't know how to solve, right? It's not worth to spend that much time on the second packet, right, on your own, because if you had time, I wish that, you do that. But I'm assuming that you have, some other things going on, right? So will you trust me? Only focus on the question that I'm being posting in my notes today. Just keep an eye on the announcement, right? Now, also notice that I said those equations are supposed to be transformed into the fundamental equations. By fundamental equations, I mean the ones that are in such a form: sine, cosine, tangent of an angle equals to a number. Starting from 49. Let me see, am I recording? Who's getting paranoid about this? Yes, okay. So 49, I'll say, you see that it's just almost just one step, right, away from that fundamental equation. Do you guys all see by isolating cosine x, it would just be 1/2, right? And I'm sure that you can find out what the angle is, right? And the easy angle will be 60 degrees, right? Therefore, forget about A and C. It better be B or D, right? But take a look at letter B. Why are they adding m pi? Is that right? To get all the solutions from a cosine equation, what should be the multiple of the angle that you added to the angles? It's n times 2 pi or 360, right? When do you add m pi? If you get the equation from the tangent, right? Now, that's why I have this over here. I don't know if you can see it over there. So somehow you get an equation in terms of sine and cosine of theta, right? And it works out as pi over 3 plus 2m pi, right? You're gonna have to add, multiple 360. But then you realize, you're solving for 2x. So how would you get the x? You divide out the 2, right? Do you see that? You might still end up getting m pi. So my point is, only looking at m pi doesn't tell you the full story. You might get it from a tangent equation, which is in the fundamental form, right? You know that you have to add m pi, but you might also get it from the equation that's supposed to add 2m pi, but you end up being divided out of 2. But in this case, that's not the case. See that? It's cosine x. Means you don't have to divide out of 2, right? That means you can even see right away what will be the right option, right? And it has to be D. Okay, now realistically, it's not even worth to try that much, time to do reasoning if it's a multiple choice. If you seriously think that, can it be B or D? I mean, try n to be, 1. Just take n to be 1, so then they'll be different, right? So one of the answers says that it will be pi over 3 plus pi. Type it into the calculator, see if it works with the original equation. If that doesn't work out, forget about a B, right? But if it's a FRQ, make sure that you include the correct multiple of the period for a fundamental equation for sine and cosine, it would be the multiple of 2 pi or multiple of 360. Now, what about 50? You guys tell me, what should I do to get to the fundamental equation of the cosine x? Right? So subtract 5 cosine x and a radical 2 from both sides, right? So I'm sure that you can see it will be 2 cosine x equals negative radical 2, right? So cosine x will be negative radical 2 over 2, right? And you can go from there. Okay, so that's 50. Now what about 51? You see, oh, I have secant there. All right, so probably have to do some fancy identity to turn it into sine and cosine stuff. I mean, you could. But I hope you realize in the packet, when I said that you go only up to 5a, there are only equations like 50 that you just have to get yourself, the fundamental equation. Or like the ones that I worked out with like a multi-angle, right? Like a 2a and 2b. But the kind that I just worked out, in 3b or even number 4 or 5a, they're all about factoring. Okay? So maybe all it takes is just factor to you be able to see some fundamental equations. You maybe see multiple ones, but you're not able to factor it unless you have everything on one side, right? So therefore, if you could remind yourself, for some reason, you don't see the equations that are in a form like those ones. Try to isolate the trig function, right? Or try to move things all to the same place, right? Same side and factor. So in 51, I'm looking at tangent x times secant x, right? So I take that negative 2 tangent x, push it to the left-hand side, it would be plus 2 tangent x equal to 0. You guys realize that we can factor out the GCF, which is tangent x, right? Take that out. You have secant x plus 2 equal to 0. So now you realize, oh, this is a zero product, right? Of two expressions. According to the zero product rule, the only way it works is to have either tangent x equal to 0, right? Or secant x plus 2 equal to 0. Do you guys know how to solve for the x from the tangent x equal to 0? That's one of the fundamental equation, right? The one on the back, right, of that sheet. And it turns out that the only angle that tangent of that angle will be 0, it will be 0. But do you realize that how would you find the angle x? If you just don't remember and it's not in a chart, right? At least get yourself an angle to start with. You have the calculator. You know that you can take the inverse function to get what the angle is, right? Why don't you type in, now if you want, I can try it now. How much is tangent inverse of 0? Type it in, you'll see it's 0, right? And it turns out that this is the only angle you have, right, for the tangent. Okay. Say it again. Because instead of finding how much tangent x is equal to, I'm going backwards and say that I do know what tangent x is equal to. It's 0. I want to know what angle, so that tangent of that angle will be 0, right? And you might say, oh, that's kind of risky. How am I supposed to know that, that's the only answer? Should I just take whatever that comes out of the calculator? You should if it's tangent. I believe I told you before, when I go over those tangent equations, remember that all those fundamental equations about tangent has only one fundamental solution, right? Whatever you get, take it from the calculator, or either you just know it, right? But you do have to add, n pi, right? So at the end of the day, x has to be 0 plus n pi. Pi is 180 degrees. Okay. What about the second equation right there? Secant x plus 2 equal to 0. What can we do? Is that fundamental? Like one of those I gave you? I didn't give you anything about cosecant or secant, right? But whenever you see secant, what would you do back then? Next. Yes, 1 over cosine plus 2 equal to 0, right? That means 1 over cosine is nothing but negative 2. So cosine x will be negative 1/2, right? See, then you know what to do after that, right? Again, that's still a fundamental equation. It might not seem like that, but you realize, you're better off to just turn the secant and cosecant into the reciprocal, right? And go from there, okay? All right, so let me zoom out a little bit. So therefore, those 3 equations I picked from that packet, I call them pretty much fundamental equations, right? You might have to do something to get them, but it should be pretty doable. Now we have the multi-angle. All right, so now what bothers people in multi-angle kind of equations is they have to go through a lot of n's, right? Sometimes to figure it out, it will be either 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 solutions, right? Well, guess what? I know. Yeah. See, 52, right? Yeah. Now, if we were to guess, what would be the answer for 52? What would you pick? Why? Say it again? Okay. Then what about here? If you had to guess in SAT, I would like to hear if you have a different kind of technique to figure it out just by guessing. Okay. All right. So now when I was in school, the student says that, hey, we actually used to use that for English test. When they asked us, hey, what word go into that blank? I mean, how am I supposed to know? They're all the same. Because, well, they're not the same. They have similar meanings, right? So they say that just go with the longest one, right? The one that's most syllables or, the most letters. That's not that reliable, right? And then later on, they say, hey, just go with C. Right? Statistically, you know what? C might be even better because, for the AP exam, physics, I actually study all, as a teacher, I have the access to AP Classroom, right? So I pull all the answers from all the questions and I study how likely C or D or A or B will be the right answer. And it turns out, guess what? C is the most likely answer. That means if you're desperate in AP exam, go with the C. It's about 26%. I'll tell you that on average, every option is about 25% to be right. C has only 1% higher, and it's good enough for you to pick. But listen to this. A is 23%. But here's the thing. I'm not joking. Don't jump in and say, I'm going to go with C. Eliminate. Because there might be 2 stupid answers, right? Eliminate them. When you're down to A and a C, if I were you, I'll pick C, no matter what. I don't have the time to go with it, any logic, right? But in this case, now, I'll tell you, one of my first period students says, in SAT. That's why you guys might want to know this, but don't quote on me. It wasn't me saying that. Right? So that student said the option has most repeated number, most likely will be the right answer. That's why, yeah. So I don't take any blame for that. But C technically has most of the pies, right? So a lot of pies in there, and C is the right answer. Now there is a way to, yeah. Go ahead, Max. Now we're talking about math, right? So now you could also see without even work it out. You know what the 4 is doing? It's squeezing the function, right? It's squeezing more solutions. You guys remember from 2, is that 2b? Anyway, so we did something. So if it was 2x, we end up getting 4 solutions. So typically 2, right? Why are there 4? Because you're able to squeezing 2 more. But guess what? Now it's 4 times. You're squeezing 4 more. You know what? Yeah, 53 is indeed D. Okay, so now, you know what's even better? Just by guessing using that logic, you want to be safe, right? You don't want to look back. You don't have the time for it. So you have calculator. Why won't you say 52, right? If I were you, I see, oh, 0, 0. Let me take 0. Put it in. Make sure you're in radian mode, right? Sine 0 is definitely not radical 3 over 2. A and B are out, right? When it comes to C and D, what would you pick to put it in? Whichever you like, right? Say pi over 4, because, you know, this guy has pi over 4, pi over 4. Pi over 4, sorry. This guy has pi over 4. This guy does not. If I take the pi over 4 in and it works out, it's D. If it doesn't, it's C. Does it make sense? But it works out for multiple choices. And you only solve the equation in a serious way, like I'm showing you, when you have to in the FRQ. Don't waste your time with, you know, doing all of that and getting 8 solutions. It's only 1 point, 1 out of 10, right? Because it's only 10 multiple choices. Now you might say, how likely you end up getting an equation like that for an FRQ? I mean, it's possible, not very likely, because I don't think it's really checking all the things that we want to see from the students. It's just tedious, because if you know how it works out with 2x, you know how it works out with 4x, 6x, 8x, right? It's just getting more and more solutions. There's no point of doing that. But it's a good multiple choice. All right, so now I'm sure that I don't have to do anything about the 53 or 61, right? But that's why I'm posting my notes. So you don't have to go through the packet number 2 and you know, dig up all the you know, questions and try them. Try the ones that I picked, right? Try the one I already told you how it works out. You try it on your own, right? To see even how quickly you can to get the right answer just by educated guess or using the calculator, right? Or if you feel like that, you know what? Let me try this seriously because I think that it might be in FRQ. Then do it in the right way, okay? Now let's say it again. 61. Let me see. 0 is the 2. It may be B. Well, what I can do is, hey, what is okay, so sine of something, right? Is it horizontal or vertical coordinate when it comes to a point on a unit circle? Vertical. You see, it's always 50-50, right? So now, if you want a vertical coordinate to be 0, where would it be? The point could be here, right? Or there. What is the angle associated with that? 0 or pi, right? But in this case, guess what? All I care is how many solutions would there be? If there are 2, guess what the 3 is going to do? Squeezing more solutions. There's 6 solutions. Oh, you know what? Take a look. That's not supposed to be included. Well, you know what? Let me see what that answer is supposed to be. 61 is, oh, you know what? That's so bad. The answer says it's letter B, but it literally included the one that's not supposed to be included due to the restricted range. You see that? You have 2 pi penalties. It means it's not reachable, right? You're not those, you know, then multiple choice is going to be out of 9 points. So I just disregard that, you know, question. I'll trash it. I'll give you a free point. You have to earn it. No. So I guess there are 10 multiple choices. If there happen to be a question that the answer is wrong, I'm not giving everyone a free point, but making it, you know, only whatever you get, you know, out of 9 points. So it's like, you know, that question I don't even grade it. Okay. All right. Now moving on to those questions. I said these are factorable equations. I know that you're gonna say that. Well, how am I supposed to have to factor? Like I said, you know, if equations are not in those standard form, you're not gonna be able to get to the part you can use the unit circle to tell what the answers are, right? You know what you can do? Isolate those functions like cosine x or sine x, right? Or if you have things mixed up, factor, like you saw in one of the previous problems, right? For example, like, do you see in 54, you could factor the left-hand side. Now, if somehow you don't see it, you know, intuitively, you can call cosine x as some sort of new variable. Let's call it y. So that equation becomes y squared plus 2y plus 1 equal to 0, right? So you should know how to solve for y, right? You realize that the left-hand side is a perfect square trinomial. Y plus 1 square equals to 0, and y has to be -1. But, you know, y is just cosine x, right? That means cosine x is -1, and I'm sure you know what to do after that. In 55, you have to put everything on one side in order to factor it, right? Once you do that, take the sine of x to the left-hand side, and you'll be able to factor the sine of x, right? And you get, you know, 2 fundamental equations. 58, hopefully you notice that the cosine x is a common factor. Take it out, you will get 2 fundamental equations right away. 59. And again, it seems complicated, but trust me, if you take this guy to the left-hand side, take that out, and you get, you know, some equations to play with, right? The easy ones, right? They just look like the fundamental ones. But I want to ask you, what if it's 62? What would you do? But how would you factor it? Cosine square and a sine, right? So when you have things mixed up, you know, you wish that you can just factor the GCF, right? But which identity? Good. Yes, that's the one. So I remember I said that like a while ago. If you notice cosine square, you should always think about the sine square, right? If you see a sine square, think about the cosine square. In this case, you're better off to have everything in terms of sine. There is an easy way to turn cosine square into sine square, right? I'll just rewrite that equation as 2 times 1 minus sine squared x plus sine of x minus 2 equal to 0, right? So you can just distribute that 2, right? You know, organize it a little bit more, right? So you see that it will be, again, an equation about sine of x, which can be easily factored. Okay. Like I said, all you have to do is keep an eye on the fundamental equation, keep an eye on the multi-angle, right? You know that potentially can get more angles, right? If you have a multi-angle like a 2x and 3x. But if the equations are as complicated as the ones you see over here, like those ones, ask yourself, how would you factor? That's most likely the way it works, right? How would you factor to get the fundamental equations? Right? But please remember, if they're MCQs, right? If you seriously had a hard time to know like right away how to do it, shuffle those numbers into the equation, see if it works. But make sure that when you deal with those pi's and stuff, your calculator has to be in a radian mode to be able to have it work out. Okay. Anyway, so please don't forget that tomorrow morning will be the last chance for you to do your quiz. That's it.